Greetings, students. I'm Dr. Sadri, your instructor for this INR 2002 course. This is, the lecture I'm going to give you for the very, very last chapter, chapter 31 in our text, okay? And this is a very interesting chapter because it tries to bring a lot of information all together. So if you look at my PowerPoint, which I'm hoping that you are always looking at the PowerPoint as you're, watching my videos, it has 23 slides, okay? So let's start without any, any other, discussion. Let's start right away because it's going to take a little bit longer on this video. All right, slide number 2, because slide number 1 is always the cover page. Is that right? Slide number 2, focus on learning objectives. What are some of the things that your authors and myself, we want you to know? Something about the post-sovereign age, a little bit about the dominance of superpowers. We want you to also learn a little bit about microstate, failed state. We want you to know a little bit about economic interdependence, the whole notion of globalization and political issues, growth of the IGOs, intergovernmental organizations, and global civil, society, and toward, global, governance. And last but not least, some of the perspective we talked about, is that right? Social constructivism, realism, Marxism, and, liberalism. All right, having said that, with slide number 3, let's get started. So here in this, basically course and the text that we use, we try to show you the development of political, or world politics over time. Is that right? And we are not suggesting that it started great. We are not suggesting everything has been peachy keen. We are not suggesting everything has been perfect. We just try to show you both ups and downs. Is that right? Some successes, some failures. All right. So one one old issue basically to say is that the old international system really focused a whole lot about international political issues associated with military and economic. Guess what? In the modern period, there are a lot of new issues like human rights, like environmental issues. So that's one thing. As a part of this whole world changing, sovereignty, etc., slide number 4, is that right? We can say that the new topic deals not just with international relation actors, like the UN, like the other IOs, IOs, international organizations, like IOs like World Bank, IMF, WHO, World Health Organization, WTO, World Trade Organization. But also it talks about a lot of, we talked about a lot of theories, There is no one theory better than others. Each one of them, they have some advantages and somewhat disadvantages. Okay. So what does all this mean in terms of the sovereignty? Is sovereignty really changing? Well, going to slide number 5, you notice that, I put sovereignty over there with what? Bold letters, is that right? And basically refers sovereignty, another term for what? Independence, for all practical purposes, okay? And then here we are referring to, in a state, when a state is sovereign, the government does not take order from anybody else and is the main supreme political entity within that structure. Because if you remember, we talked about a state is a political/legal apparatus that has what? 5 major characteristics. It has to have people. 2, your people, those, it has to have territory because the people are going to take some land, is that right? Having access to water or not, in terms of ocean, seas or something, that's optional. 3, it needs to have, to bring a sense of order, I didn't say democracy, I didn't say dictatorship. A sense of order needs to have a government. Number 4, that government, is that right? To be in that territory has to be sovereign, a nice French word, which translates to independence, is that right? And 5th, last but not least, is diplomatic recognition. Other members of international community should recognize the what? Independence of that particular unit. So that has been something that has been the case. And when you look at it from the perspective of your authors, you see that they keep talking about, sovereignty has been an issue since 1648. Now, what was the very important event in 1648? Do you remember? We talked about this. It was Treaty of Westphalia. Okay, so since Treaty of Westphalia in the last 350 years, we see that, European system and that Westphalian system has gone through some changes. Is that right? Of course, there were factors such as colonialism come about, globalization has come about, and your authors are really emphasizing and moving the chapter toward the whole notion of, ooh, remember globalization. Is that right? Because this globalization is maybe changing, sovereignty. Maybe states are not as sovereign as they used to be. This is one of the underlying questions. I want you to pay attention. Okay, so today, while sovereignty has a long, since become, long-standing, record, is that right? The whole notion of globalization, has kind of undermined some of the state sovereignty. Now, what do they mean by these things? Let's go on talk about slide number 6. So, state sovereignty has never been equal in terms of, power, in terms of their power. Is that right? Some states are more powerful than others. Okay, so some states maybe do not need to take order from others, and some do because, sometimes they are forced to, It's not like their choice. Of course, in that regard, it makes a difference if you're a superpower. Like, for example, we Americans and the Russians, if they were Soviet Union and now the Russian Federation, we have always had what? Tremendous amount of power over a lot of other states. So there is an asymmetry of power. Okay. Slide number 7 talks about the dominance of these, powerful entities. And it talks about, well, there's an ideological zeal right there. Is that right? But at the same time, the whole notion of non-interference in anybody else's business. Well, it sounds really nice, doesn't it? How much of it really has happened? I want you to think about it. I get you a minute. Has non-interference truly been the case all the time? Okay, so I leave you with a question. I want you to think about it. So in the post-Cold War period, we see that the great powers have started still, again, interfering in other people's affairs. Is that right? Very good example of that. Here we go. Since, Cold War, people have said, oh, Soviet Union used to interfere in affairs of other countries. We know that, for example, in 1956, Soviet troops, they basically walk into Hungary. In 1968, they walked into, Czechoslovakia. Is that right? And then in 80s, and 79, 80s, they invaded Afghanistan. So here we go, 3 case studies of it. Is that right? Okay, so is the issue completely over? There is no more Soviet Union. There's Russian Federation. Since Russian Federation came about and has reorganized itself, okay, here we're talking about since, during the post-Cold War period, since 1991. In 2008, Russian Federation, invaded Georgia, took 2 of those areas. I wrote a book about all of these, okay? And in 2014, they, invaded Ukraine, and they took Crimea Peninsula. And last year, in February 24th of 2022, they invaded, Ukraine, hoping that they can take the whole thing, but at least, if they can take the eastern wall section of it. So, interferences are back, okay? Then one of the other things I wanted to also mention, your text is talking about it, is these microstates. These are very, very small units, Sometimes they were principalities. You can see them all over the world. Those of you who have traveled to Europe, for example, look, there's a very famous microstate we call Vatican. Is that right? It's just basically like a few buildings and streets and everything in Rome. Guess what? In Italy, actually, there is another microstate called San Marino. In the border between Switzerland and Austria, there is another one, Liechtenstein. You see what I mean? So there are a number. In south of France, there is another one, Monaco. Okay? So what I want you to know is there are a lot of these all over, here and there. Okay? And you need to consider it because some people, they say these are sub-sovereign units. Some people say these are this and that. In any case, you need to know them because it's important in international relation. So what is the status of these? Another concept, and you notice that I mentioned that one in slide number 9, is the failed state. And these are states that, according to Rothberg in 2004 work, is that right? It's a phenomenon that these are states that they have not been able to what? To manage their internal conflict or provide their people with something. Isn't the job of every government and state to protect its own people? Or even if you cannot protect them, when there is a chaos going on, is that right? Then you're a failed state. And there is a whole lot of, literature associated with that. Some of the other concepts that I want to emphasize, these are not the first time we talk about it. If you remember, many of these topics we talked about before, but because this is the concluding, chapter and, material that we cover, I want to highlight it so you remember how they fit. One of these notions, as slide number 10 is talking about, is the notion of interdependence. Okay, remember when we talked about Europe and other places, like, look, what truly ended the, animosity between the French and the Germans throughout European history? They were all fighting one another. In a way, if you think about it, World War I and World War II was the result of these two countries with their allies fighting one another. Is that right? Okay. If you remember, we talked about David Mitrani, and what Mitrani suggested was, one strategy would be separating countries. The other one is getting them to work together. That's how you can make peace, okay? Now, when you create those type of situation, if their economies are complementary, you see, then you create economic interdependence. And in that case, France needs certain products coming from Germany. Germany needs certain products coming from France because they need each other. It's like they're in a boat. Neither one of them would like to rock the boat, because you do that, you'll miss something. You see, when there is no interdependence, guess what happened? People have nothing to lose by rocking the boat, by taking risk. But when they feel like their life is interdependent, they don't do that. This happens not just among states, it happens among us as human beings. Our relationship to our parents, our relationship to our significant others, is that right? So this is not such an, crazy notion. So remember the notion of economic interdependence. Then in, slide number 11, we talked about globalization and political issues right there. And here, globalization and economic independence are serving, in a way, according to your authors, they're weakening state sovereignty. Because states have a tendency to think, oh, I'm the supreme, entity within this territory. Well, if little by little your economy and everything else is depending on other people, well, you can't control others. Is that right? Okay, so if this is the case, then it seems like you're not as independent as you used to be. Okay, so you need to consider those. So that's why sometimes people think globalization is going against what? The power of, sovereignty power of the states. One of the other notions that I put for you right here to have an understanding of what's going on based on the material in the book was in slide number 12, crime. Well, it's one issue when crime happens at one state or another state. It's also another issue when it happens between states. Who's going to have jurisdiction? But at the same time, it seems like sometimes, happens in one place, it goes to somewhere else, Again, this could be a force that, no matter how sovereign you are, you can't solve it by yourself, because these people, these criminals, they jump from one place to another, okay? So these transnational criminal organizations, if they're doing drug trafficking or human trafficking or any other kind of problem, so this is something that we need to consider. Another issue in slide number 13, health issues. Guess what? We have a tendency to take our health for granted. Is that right? Until we get the smallest little cold or sore throat or whatever. So, oh my gosh, I don't feel good. Guess what? Since 15th century, the international, community has faced a lot of serious problems. Like from 16th century, it's like the Black Death in Europe. Killed what? Millions of people in Europe, in Asia, everywhere. Is that right? Now, in your generation, I know that, of course, to us, the notion of Black Death is just only an abstract. But guess what? It wasn't too many years ago. Our generation, we remember COVID. Okay. Of course, before COVID, there were other diseases. Is that right? I mean, I put them all in in slide number 13. I'm not going to mention them because I really want you to go and take a look at them. All right. There are some questions from these slides. Okay. Please take them seriously. All right. But we remember COVID. We remember how COVID changed many of our life, changed the life of some of our friends, or some of our, family members, etc. I hope none of you lost any family member to COVID because I did, a number of them. Okay, so here we go. Slide number 14 talks about environmental issues because environmental problems do not respect boundaries. They don't say, oh, I'm a pollution that was created in America. I'm going to stay in America. No, I'm a pollution that was created in Cambodia. I'm going to stay there. Or I was produced in Afghanistan. Or I was produced in, I don't know, South Africa or in Argentina or wherever. It goes everywhere. Air pollution, water pollution, even land pollution. Sometimes, somebody walks over there, it's on their feet or something. They're hopping in a, plane or whatever or to get to another country. Guess what? They're carrying that one somewhere else and they pollute somewhere else, you see? Because we don't have like, oh, you're getting to the plane, clean up your feet. Like sometimes you enter somebody's home, they have some welcome, mat right there and you clean your feet right there before you get in. But you don't have something like this, maybe they should. Is that right? And then that way, less diseases are going to carry and less pollution problems are going to get here and there. Slide number 15 talks about IGOs. Why? Again, not because these organizations are ruling the world. These organizations are there because they are a servant of states. States, they lend them sometimes money, a little bit of an authority. They say, look, WTO, you're in charge of bringing a sense of peace to what? To international trade. Come up with, for example, rules and regulation. What is acceptable behavior of trade, what is not acceptable. WHO, World Health Organization, you come up with standards, okay? You come up, you, for example, provide for us information about the diseases, movement of them. You see what I mean? It's not like, for example, oh yeah, World Health Organization is a new world government. No, we don't have that. Slide number 16 focuses on global civil society. Here we are talking about the growth of IGOs and what your book keeps talking about, NGOs. To be honest with you, personally, I don't like the term NGOs because it says NGO stands for non-governmental organization. Well, when you say non-governmental organization, and we political scientists, within our society, we talked about interest groups. Some people can confuse an interest group, which is domestic, which is also non-governmental, with an NGO. What I really like is put an I before N. So we have IGOs, intergovernmental organization, and we have INGOs, inter-non-governmental organization. But I noticed your authors typically refer to it as NGO. A lot of other people say NGO, and then everybody thinks it's something that everybody knows. So I want my student to be smarter than everybody else and know that there takes an I before that one, okay? And these organizations are growing because they're contributing something to the development of international community. The same way that an interest group does that at the domestic level. So we have domestic level, we have international level. Domestic level, you have interest groups, or as our founding father used to call it, faction, is that right? Or pressure groups or something. At international level, we have INGOs. Association of Doctors, Doctors Without Borders, Greenpeace, you see what I mean? These are all important organizations like Human Rights Watch, you see? So each one of them, they focus on a particular topic. All right, then is slide number 17, which just starts bringing the notion of global governance. Well, how much of a global governance do we have? Don't expect that there is a world government. There is no world government. How do we know? Because there is no. When we look at our paycheck, there's nobody saying right there, okay, when we look at our paycheck, I mean, in the state of Florida, we don't pay state income tax, but I grew up in Arizona. Guess what? My paychecks when I was a kid over there, it was a state of Arizona tax, federal tax, FICA tax, Medicare tax. I was too young to even use Medicare. Is that right? Because you don't get Medicare until you get older anyway. Is that right? And you don't get also Social Security until you are retired. I was a little kid basically contributing to those things. So we know that there are different levels of government. Why? Because they tax us. Like for example, when I was in, Pima County, is that right? In Arizona. So that's one level of government taxing you. Then there is a state of Arizona, that's taxing you. Then there is a federal government taxing you. But there was nothing on my paycheck that says United Nations, or world government taxes. There's not such a thing. Is that right? Okay. So in that regard, global governance basically means that when states, they allow this international organization to perform certain functions, and they try to manage it. So sometimes they manage peace and security, sometimes they manage economic development or prosperity issues, sometimes they manage human rights, basically the three goals. Is that right? That's how they're doing their best. But how successful they are or not successful, that's another issue. Okay, continuation of this whole notion of what, global governance. I want you to think about it a little bit, because I'm going to start talking about what? I'm going to start talking about some of those perspectives that we have. So think about it. Which one of those perspectives do you remember? There is no substitute for water. Here we go. One of them is the liberal perspective. And here the liberals, they start talking about not necessarily world government, is that right? But they're talking about, for example, let's be practical and what these global governments really means. One of those people has been what? Robert Cohen. If you remember, we talked about Robert Cohen before. The book talks about him and everything. They basically look at the state utilitarian, logic. Like there's a rationale for some states to what? To build these institutions, and those institutions, they provide certain type of function. Okay, all right. Then slide number 19 talks about social constructivism. Do you remember we talked about those? That was one of the theories we talked about a long time ago, at the beginning of the semester. Okay, so social constructivism, they're also trying to focus on some of these practical issues and everything. They say that when you talk about sovereignty, when you talk about these things, remember, these are some social construct that states and people have built. Is that right? It's not like, for example, something solid. Like when you look at an apple tree, it's an apple tree. Is that right? But if you tell this, somebody, oh, this means organization. This means, for example, order. Do you see order? No. You see what I mean? So you need to be able to, distinguish between some of those abstract notions and some of those real notions. Now, remember that when we talked about social constructivism, we talked about a German scholar. Do you remember Alexander, Wendet? That he had that famous work in 1992, and he was talking about anarchy is what states make of it. Is that right? So remember those notions. Now, slide number 20. We focus on Marxists, and you know what Marxists they talk about. Following Karl Marx, the whole notion that economy is everything. It's the struggle over power of money and wealth that creates two different classes of people, poor and rich. And then what, when you think about the Marxism in the future and what they think about, their hope is that one day there would be a world without any states, and there will be a world without any classes. This is their hope. When this is going to happen, it's an issue for what? It's an issue for thinking and seeing how many centuries from now are we talking about, okay? I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just trying to tell you it's not going to happen tomorrow, okay? Or next 10 years. I can guarantee that part, all right? Or not before I retire. Okay, that's for sure. All right. So next one, slide number 21. And this one is focusing on realists. Now, remember, that was one of the, realism, if you remember, it's the oldest perspective. You remember in IR, international relation compared to politics, international relation and world politics. So remember, they focus so much on state sovereignty. But even they are understanding that, we say that maybe some states, they do not have as much, sovereignty as before. But what do you think about the, the rise of places like China and India? Is that right? Ooh, here we go. India used to be a colony. China's bits and pieces of it was colonies of the British and Portuguese and this and that and everybody else. Look at them. You see? So could we say sovereignty is gone? Something to think about. And you see also there are a number of places that are begging try to gain their sovereignty. Like what? Like Greenland, is that right? We see Basque people in Spain trying to be, we see Chechens in Russia, they're trying to be independent. We see Kurds, it doesn't matter if they're in Turkey or in Iraq or Iran or Syria or other places they want it to be. People in Quebec, sometimes Scots from time to time. So these are things that we need to really consider. Slide number 22 gets to the conclusion. What are some of the things we need to cover? Well, the future is truly impossible to predict. We political scientists, we are social scientists, we focus on human behavior. And you remember the three questions that we always want, we ask, we say every political scientist has to ask three questions: what question, why question, and how question. The what, it refers to describing a phenomenon. The why talks about the causation, what causes this phenomenon. And last but not least, the how could we predict it? Very frankly, some of our prediction levels have improved better than past, in the times past, but we still cannot predict everything. Is that right? How many things have we predicted? Did we predict Russian Revolution? No. Did we predict French Revolution? No. American Revolution? No. Iranian Revolution? No. Did we predict on October 7, 2023, Hamas is going to do that to mighty Israel? No. You see what I mean? Did we predict the beginning of World War II? No. There are a lot of important stuff. Or, for example, Japanese, attack on Pearl Harbor in, December 7, 1941. Did we predict? No. You see? So, I guess we have to be modest. We are maybe a little bit better than understanding some of these behaviors and predicting some stuff, but we have to take it with a grain of salt, okay? One thing we know that even the most powerful states cannot predict some stuff, but there is a whole field. I wanted to talk about this one a little bit because your book didn't talk about it. There's a field called political risk analysis, okay? My first job offer was actually not from a university. It was from Chase Manhattan. I was a little runny-nosed kid. I go to this conference and somebody put their business card over there from Chase Manhattan Bank, and I thought, oh, what the heck? This is a mistake. Is that right? I go over there as a matter of what? As a matter of courtesy to return the card to them and say, I'm sorry, but I think you put it in the wrong box. Is that right? Because at that time, when we would go to conferences and you were applying for jobs or something, they would give you like a little cubby, okay? And then you had your name on it, and then you would look at the list of the jobs and everything, and whatever you were interested, you can leave them a note, and then if they were interested in you, they would leave you a business card with a time and whatever place to come and whatever. So when I went over there, the guy said, I said, I'm so sorry, but I think this is in the wrong card. He said, wait a minute, aren't you Dr. Sadri? I said, yes. He said, well, I said, but I have no idea about banking. I don't know anything about banking. The only thing I've taken in my, during my PhD program was international political economy, which, as a political scientist, you learn about the economy and how it affects and everything else. He said, no, we are not interested in hiring a business person. I said, why would a bank want a political scientist? I said, well, in Manhattan, we have actually an office. This is a long time ago, though. This is like 30 years ago. Don't go over there, look for it. I don't know where it is even. I should check it probably. Is that right? Called political risk analysis. Because we are a major bank, we lend money to a lot of different countries. And guess what? We want to know how much of a risk it is to give it to that country because they could have a revolution and they could nationalize all of our assets. You see? I thought, wow, that's interesting. Okay, I didn't know. I was not interested, but I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. I didn't even know about that. All right. So what we are talking about is here they were interested in predicting behavior of states, individuals and everything. That doesn't mean that you're going to always figure it out. So it's important to know that the degree of sovereignty, because maybe by a revolution, somebody comes and takes over the country and says, we are a sovereign nation. We are going to what? We are going to nationalize whatever money we got from Chase Manhattan. We don't know. Anyway, here we would like to, the last slide, in slide number 23, what I wanted to mention. I wanted to mention that, yes, we do the best we can, and to a degree we can do a little bit of a prediction here and there, but still there is a lot of unknown. Is that right? There's a lot of unknown that why would Russia, for example, go back to Ukraine in 2022? Is that right? Wasn't the 2014 invasion and taking over that was not enough? It's hard to predict. Is that right? So does it mean that we are really living in the Hobbesian world of dog eating dog? I hope not. As a pacifist, is that right? As somebody who believes in negotiation, I hope not. But I like to think, call me an idealist, but I like to think that things are not as bad as they used to be. There's some progress. Yes, there are a lot of failures too, but there's some progress. And as long as I can see a little bit of a, water in the cup, I like to focus on the full side of it as opposed to empty side of it. Because if you want to look on empty side, there's a lot of empty things. There are a lot of negative things. It's not going to get us anywhere. So focus on the full side and the empty side, see what we can do about it to improve the situation of not just ourselves, but, our partners, our families, our friends, our countrymen and women, and hopefully our neighbors in other countries. All right, I'm going to stop right here. I hope you enjoyed this one. And then the next, video I'm going to have for you would be focusing on what? On final exam. Take care. If you have any question, as usual, what do? You send me an email. Thank you.